What baby announcement at dinner made your family call the police mid-meal? I was setting down the roasted chicken when my sister-in-law Vanessa stood up so abruptly, her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. Everyone at the table turned to look at her. My brother Derek reached for her hand, but she pulled away, her face glowing with that unmistakable pregnancy radiance I'd seen on so many women before. "We have an announcement," she said, her voice trembling with what I thought was excitement. My mother clasped her hands together, already tearing up. This was it, the moment we'd all been waiting for. Derek and Vanessa had been married for 3 years, and Mom had been dropping hints about grandchildren at every family gathering. My father set down his wine glass, smiling. My husband Noah squeezed my knee under the table. Our daughter Riley, just turned 7, was coloring on her placemat, oblivious to the tension building in the room. Vanessa's hand moved to her stomach, and I felt that familiar pang of sisterly affection mixed with envy. Noah and I had been trying for a second child for 18 months with no success, but I pushed those feelings down, determined to be happy for them. "I'm pregnant," Vanessa said, and the room erupted. Mom was already out of her chair, rushing around the table to hug her. Dad was shaking Derek's hand, clapping him on the shoulder. Riley looked up from her coloring book, confused by all the commotion. I stood to congratulate them, but something in Derek's face stopped me. He wasn't smiling. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes were fixed on his plate. Vanessa was still talking, words tumbling out faster now. 12 weeks along. We found out a month ago. We wanted to wait until the first trimester was over to tell everyone. My mother was crying, asking about due dates and whether they'd found out the gender yet. Vanessa laughed, but it sounded wrong. Brittle. We decided to do one of those early blood tests, the kind that can tell you everything. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, and I noticed her hands were shaking. "It's a boy." More celebration. Dad was already talking about teaching his grandson to fish, to play baseball. Noah was congratulating Derek, who still hadn't said a word. I watched Vanessa smooth out the paper on the table. It looked official, covered in medical terminology and numbers I couldn't make sense of from where I stood. "There's something else," Vanessa said, and her voice cut through the noise like glass breaking. The room went quiet. Even Riley stopped coloring. "The test also includes genetic screening," Vanessa continued. Her eyes were locked on my mother now, and there was something in her expression I couldn't name. Fear? Anger? Triumph? They look for abnormalities, genetic diseases, things like that, but they also analyze the baby's DNA profile. My mother's smile was starting to falter. "That's wonderful, honey. So everything's healthy?" Vanessa didn't answer immediately. She picked up the paper, holding it like it might burn her. "Everything's healthy." But there was something unexpected in the results. Derek finally moved, reaching for her arm. "Vanessa, don't." She jerked away from him. "They're going to find out eventually. Better now than later." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. I felt Noah stiffen beside me, his hand tightening on my knee. "What are you talking about?" my father asked. Vanessa looked directly at my mother, and I saw tears streaming down her face. "The genetic screening compares the baby's DNA to both parents. It's standard to check for inherited conditions, but there was a discrepancy." She held up the paper. "According to this test, Derek cannot biologically be the father of this child. The DNA markers don't match." The words hung in the air like smoke. I couldn't process them. Derek was staring at Vanessa with an expression I'd never seen on my brother's face before. Pure devastation. My mother made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. "That's impossible," she whispered. Vanessa laughed, and it was the most terrible sound I'd ever heard. That's what I thought too. So I had them run it again. Same results. Derek is not the father. Derek stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "You said it was a mistake. You said the lab screwed up." His voice was shaking. "That's what you told me a month ago." A month. They'd known for a month. Vanessa's face crumpled. I thought maybe it was wrong. I wanted it to be wrong. My father's face had gone pale. Who's the father then? The question nobody wanted to ask, but everyone was thinking. Vanessa's eyes swept across the table, landing on each of us in turn. When her gaze met mine, I felt a chill run down my spine. "That's the thing," she said softly. "The test shows something else. Something that doesn't make any sense." She turned back to my mother. "The baby shares genetic markers with Derek's family. Specifically, with Derek's father." The room exploded. My mother screamed. My father jumped to his feet, knocking over his wine glass. Red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like blood. Derek was shouting, words I'd never heard him use before. Noah grabbed Riley and rushed her out of the room before she could hear any more. I stood frozen, unable to move or speak or think. Vanessa was crying openly now, clutching the paper to her chest. "I don't understand it either," she sobbed. "But the DNA doesn't lie. This baby is biologically related to both Derek and his father. That's impossible unless—" She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. My father's face had gone from pale to purple. "This is insane. You're making this up. You cheated, and now you're trying to— To what?" Vanessa screamed back. "To what exactly? Why would I make this up? Why would I humiliate myself like this?" She threw the paper at him. It fluttered to the ground between them. "I had 3 different labs run the test. 3. They all say the same thing." My mother had collapsed back into her chair, her hand pressed to her mouth. She was staring at my father with an expression I couldn't read. Horror? Recognition? Fear? Derek picked up the paper with shaking hands. I watched him read it, his lips moving silently. When he looked up, he wasn't looking at Vanessa anymore. He was looking at Dad. "Is this possible?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Could there be some genetic anomaly that would explain this? My father didn't answer. He was staring at Mom now, and something was passing between them. Some wordless communication I wasn't privy to. "Richard," my mother said, and her voice was strange. Hollow. "You need to tell them." Everything inside me went cold. "Tell us what?" I heard myself ask. My father's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. My mother stood up slowly, like she'd aged 30 years in the last 5 minutes. "I think," she said carefully, "we need to discuss something as a family. Something I thought I'd never have to explain." Vanessa was watching her with wide eyes. Derek had gone completely still. "Mom," I said, "what's going on?" She looked at me, and I saw guilt written across every line of her face. "When Derek was born," she began, then stopped. Started again. "We had trouble conceiving, your father and I. We tried for 5 years before we finally got pregnant with Derek. We were so happy, but there were complications during the pregnancy. I was hospitalized at 28 weeks with preeclampsia. They had to do an emergency C-section. I knew this story. She'd told it 100 times. Derek was in the NICU for 6 weeks. It was the hardest time of our lives. And then," she paused, her eyes filling with tears, "and then something happened that we swore we'd never talk about." The silence was suffocating. My father still hadn't moved. He was staring at the wall behind us, his face blank. "There was a mistake at the hospital," Mom continued. "The day we brought Derek home, a nurse came to our house. She was panicking. She told us there had been a mix-up in the NICU. 2 baby boys born on the same day, both premature, both in critical condition. They'd been getting switched around during care shifts because they looked so similar. The hospital couldn't say with certainty which baby was ours." I felt the room tilting. "What are you saying?" Derek's voice was barely a whisper. "We had a DNA test done," Mom said, "just to be sure, to know that we had the right baby. And the results came back. You were ours, Derek. Biologically ours. The test was conclusive." She wiped her eyes. "But there was another finding. Something the genetic counselor took us aside to explain privately. You shared unusual genetic markers with both of us. More specifically, you had genetic overlap with Richard that suggested—" She broke off, unable to continue. My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "The counselor said it appeared that I wasn't just Derek's father. The genetic profile suggested I might also be his grandfather." The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. "That's impossible," I said. "Unless—" The realization hit me like a physical blow. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw the truth written in her tears. "Mom?" She nodded just once. "I was 18 when I got pregnant with Derek. Your father and I weren't together yet. We weren't even dating. I was dating someone else. Richard's father." The room was spinning. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "Grandpa William?" I couldn't keep the horror out of my voice. Grandpa William had died when I was 12. I'd loved him. He'd taught me to ride a bike, had come to every one of my school plays. "He was 42, Mom said, her voice breaking. "I was his son's girlfriend. We'd been dating for 2 months when it happened. Richard had brought me home for Christmas break. I was sleeping in the guest room. William came in one night after everyone else was asleep. He said he needed to talk to me about something. I believed him. I was so naive." She was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. "He raped me. And when I found out I was pregnant 2 months later, I was terrified to tell anyone. I broke up with Richard. I tried to handle it on my own, but I was so scared, and I had nowhere to go." My father's voice was hollow when he spoke. "She finally told me the truth when she was 4 months along. She showed up at my apartment crying. I wanted to kill him, but she begged me not to say anything. She said no one would believe her, that it would destroy the family. And she was probably right. My mother worshipped my father. Everyone did. He was respected in the community, a deacon at the church." He looked at Derek. "I told her I'd marry her, that we'd raise the baby as ours. We had a small ceremony before she started showing. My parents thought we were just young and impulsive. William never knew I knew. He died thinking he got away with it. The revelation was too big, too terrible." I looked at Derek, who'd gone white as paper. "So, you're my half-brother," he said to Dad. Not a question. A statement of fact. "And my son?" Dad replied. "Both. Always both. I loved you from the moment I first held you. That never changed, even knowing the truth." Vanessa had sunk back into her chair, still clutching her stomach. "So this baby," she said slowly, "is carrying the genetic legacy of both Derek and William. That's why the test shows what it shows. Derek is William's son, and our baby is Derek's son. The genetic markers overlap because they're connected through William. But how did you get pregnant?" The question came out before I could stop it. Vanessa's face flushed red. "I don't know. We were careful. We weren't even trying. This was an accident." She looked at Derek, desperation in her eyes. "I swear to you, I never cheated. Never. I don't understand how this happened either." I watched Derek process this. watched the anger and betrayal on his face slowly morph into something else. Confusion. Then horror. The ski trip, he said suddenly. Last December. We went to Colorado with your work friends. Vanessa frowned. What about it? We got snowed in for 3 extra days. Everyone was stuck at the lodge. Do you remember that night we all got drunk? The power went out? Vanessa's face was blank. I remember the power going out. I remember we were drinking by the fireplace. But after that, it's fuzzy. I woke up in our room the next morning with the worst hangover of my life. Derek's hands were shaking again. I woke up in the hallway, on the floor. I had no idea how I got there. And when I came back to the room, you were still asleep. But your clothes were different than what you'd been wearing the night before. The implication hung between them. Vanessa's eyes widened. No, that's not possible. I would remember. Would you? Derek's voice was harsh. You said yourself you don't remember anything after the fireplace. Neither do I. And there were 20 people at that lodge. We didn't know half of them. Vanessa, what if someone... He couldn't finish. Didn't need to. We need to call the police, my father said abruptly. If what you're suggesting is true, if she was assaulted while unconscious, we need to report it. Vanessa was shaking her head. It's been 10 months. There's no evidence. No proof. I don't even know if anything happened. Maybe I just changed clothes because I spilled something. Maybe I'm wrong about the timing entirely. You're not wrong, Derek said quietly. The timing matches up exactly. December 21st. We got drunk that night. You'd be about 12 weeks pregnant now if conception happened then, right? Vanessa nodded slowly. The dates match what the doctor told me. She looked around the table at all of us. But I can't accuse someone of rape when I don't remember anything, when I don't even know if anything actually happened. This is insane. How did we get here? I found my voice finally. Who else was at the lodge that night? Derek pulled out his phone with shaking hands. There were photos. Lots of photos. Everyone was posting them for days afterward. He scrolled through his camera roll, then his social media. I moved to stand behind him, watching as he pulled up image after image. Groups of people drinking, playing games, laughing by the fire. My stomach turned as I realized what we were looking at. Potential suspects. Potential rapists. These 6 guys I'd never met before, Derek said, pointing to a group photo. They were friends of Vanessa's co-worker. They'd rented the lodge for a bachelor party, but the groom had to cancel, so they invited other people to help cover the cost. That's how we ended up there. He kept scrolling, stopped on one image. His face went completely white. What? Vanessa leaned over to look. I heard her gasp. In the photo, a man was standing slightly apart from the group, watching the camera with an odd expression. He was older than the others, maybe mid-40s, with a strong jaw and dark hair going gray at the temples. That's Craig, Vanessa said softly. Craig Donovan. He works in my department. He's the one who invited us on the trip. Derek zoomed in on the man's face. Does he look familiar to you, Dad? My father stood and came around the table. When he saw the photo, he made a sound like he'd been punched. Oh my God. What? I demanded. What is it? Dad's hand was shaking as he pointed at the screen. That's William's face. Not exactly, but close enough. The jaw, the eyes, the way he's standing. This man looks almost exactly like my father did at that age. The pieces were clicking together in my mind, forming a picture too horrible to fully comprehend. Derek, I said carefully, did you tell anyone at work about your family situation? About your conception being complicated? Derek frowned, thinking. Vanessa knew. We'd talked about it when we were discussing whether to have genetic testing done before trying to get pregnant. We were worried about passing on any potential health issues from the circumstances. Who else knew? Vanessa's face had gone pale. I might have mentioned it to Craig. He was asking about our plans for kids. He'd just gotten divorced, was talking about family stuff. I said we were being extra careful because of Derek's complicated family history. I didn't give details, but I said there were genetic concerns because of how Derek was conceived. She stopped, realization dawning. Oh God, you don't think... My father grabbed his phone. What's this man's full name? Craig Donovan. Why? Dad was already typing, searching. His face kept getting paler as he scrolled through whatever he was finding. Finally, he turned the phone around to show us a genealogy website. Craig Donovan, born in 1979. Mother's name, Patricia Donovan. Father's name, unknown. He scrolled down. But look at the family connections people have traced. His maternal half-siblings have done DNA tests. They all share the same mother but different fathers. And look who one of them is connected to. He pointed to a name on the screen. Kevin Morrison, listed as a genetic match suggesting they share a paternal grandfather. And Kevin Morrison's grandfather was named William Turner. Vanessa was crying again. That's your maiden name, she said to my mother. William Turner was my father's name, Mom confirmed, her voice barely audible. Richard's father, Derek's biological father. The implications were crushing us all. So Craig Donovan is William Turner's son, I said slowly, which makes him Derek's half-brother. And he somehow found out, my father said. Maybe through one of those Ancestry DNA sites. Maybe he'd been searching for his biological father. And then he met Vanessa, learned about Derek's situation, and put the pieces together. Derek looked like he might be sick. Why would he do this? Why would he... He couldn't say it. Because he's his father's son, my mother said bitterly. William was a predator. He used his power, his position, his charm to hurt people. And apparently he passed that on to at least one of his other children. She looked at Vanessa. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. If I'd said something back then, if I'd reported what he did, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Or maybe you'd have been destroyed and nothing would have changed, Dad said quietly. The system doesn't protect women like it should. You know that. We all know that. The table was covered in spilled wine and fallen papers, and the remnants of a dinner that felt like it had happened in another lifetime. Noah appeared in the doorway, Riley in his arms. She was asleep, her head on his shoulder. I put on a movie in the den, he said quietly. She fell asleep 10 minutes in. Someone want to tell me what's happening? I looked at him. This man I loved, this man I'd built a life with, and didn't know where to start. Call the police, Vanessa said suddenly. Your dad was right. We need to call them. Derek was already dialing. I heard him explain the situation to the dispatcher, watched his free hand clench and unclench as he spoke. They're sending detectives, he said when he hung up. They said not to touch anything, not to discuss the case among ourselves anymore until they arrive. They're treating it as a potential sexual assault investigation. We sat in silence, waiting. The chicken I'd spent all afternoon preparing had gone cold on the serving platter. The salad was wilting. The wine stain on the tablecloth was setting. None of it mattered. 20 minutes later, 2 detectives arrived. Detective Laura Chen and Detective Michael Santos. Young and serious, with notebooks and recording devices. They separated us, taking statements one by one in different rooms. I sat in my home office with Detective Santos and recounted everything I'd witnessed at dinner. Every word, every revelation. He took notes steadily, his expression neutral. And you'd never met this Craig Donovan? He asked. Never, I confirmed. I'd heard his name in passing when Vanessa talked about work, but that's it. Did your sister-in-law ever mention him being inappropriate with her? Any sexual attention, unwanted touching, anything like that? I tried to remember. She complained once about him being overly friendly. This was months ago. She said he kept finding excuses to talk to her, to touch her arm or shoulder when they spoke. She thought he was just socially awkward. Detective Santos wrote that down. And the ski trip. Did she mention anything unusual about it when she got back? I closed my eyes thinking back to December. She said it was fun but exhausting. She mentioned being hungover. She said she and Derek had both drunk too much and made fools of themselves. She laughed about it. There was nothing that suggested she thought anything bad had happened. He nodded. Sometimes victims don't realize they've been assaulted, especially if they were incapacitated at the time. The mind protects itself by filling in gaps with false memories of normalcy. The clinical way he said it made my skin crawl. This was Vanessa we were talking about, my sister-in-law, the woman who always remembered everyone's birthday, who volunteered at the animal shelter, who made the best chocolate chip cookies I'd ever tasted. When the detectives had finished with all of us, they gathered us back in the dining room. We're going to need to bring Mr. Donovan in for questioning, Detective Chen said. We'll also need to obtain a DNA sample from him for comparison testing. Mrs. Whitmore, we'll need your permission to access your medical records and the genetic testing results. Vanessa nodded. Whatever you need. We should warn you, Detective Santos said carefully. This is going to be difficult to prove. If Mrs. Whitmore was unconscious or heavily intoxicated, she couldn't consent. But establishing that intercourse occurred without consent when the victim has no memory of the event is challenging. We'll need to build a circumstantial case based on the DNA evidence, witness statements, and any other evidence we can gather. What about the lodge? Derek asked. There were security cameras. I remember seeing them in the common areas. Detective Chen wrote that down. We'll obtain the footage, but it's been 10 months. Many establishments only keep recordings for 30 to 90 days unless there's a specific reason to preserve them. The hope that had flickered in Derek's eyes died, so he might get away with it. We'll do everything we can, Detective Chen assured him. But you should prepare for the possibility that this case might not go to trial, or that if it does, the outcome might not be what you're hoping for. They left with folders full of documents and photos and statements. The house felt empty and too large without them. Mom and Dad left shortly after, Mom still crying, Dad holding her like she might break. I heard him murmur something about finding a therapist, about finally dealing with what had happened all those years ago. Vanessa and Derek stayed. Neither of them seemed capable of driving. We all sat in the living room, not speaking. Noah made coffee that no one drank. Riley slept on, oblivious to the horror unfolding around her. I'm sorry, Vanessa said finally. I'm sorry for doing this at dinner, for dropping it all on everyone like that. I just couldn't hold it in anymore. The weight of knowing and not knowing at the same time was killing me. Derek moved to sit beside her on the couch. He took her hand. Did you think I'd leave you? When you found out about the DNA? Vanessa nodded, tears streaming down her face. I thought you'd think I cheated. I thought you'd hate me. I thought I'd lose you and the baby and everything we'd built together. He pulled her close. I could never hate you. Whatever happened, it wasn't your fault. It was his. And we'll get through this together. You, me, and our son. Watching them hold each other, I felt something break open in my chest. The tragedy of it all. The intergenerational trauma that had started with my mother and continued with Vanessa. 2 women violated by men who shared the same blood. The investigation moved slowly. Craig Donovan was brought in for questioning 3 days later. He denied everything. Denied drugging anyone, denied having sex with Vanessa, denied even knowing who Derek was. He agreed to the DNA test with a lawyer present, confident the results would exonerate him. They came back 2 weeks later. The baby was his. The genetic markers proved it conclusively. Craig Donovan was the biological father of Vanessa's child, and he was also Derek's half-brother, sharing a father in William Turner. The district attorney filed charges: rape of an intoxicated person, administering drugs to facilitate sexual assault, and criminal fraud for using false pretenses to gain access to the victim. Craig's lawyer fought it viciously. There was no proof of drugs in Vanessa's system because she'd never been tested. There was no video evidence because the lodge had indeed erased their recordings after 3 months. There were no witnesses who saw Craig and Vanessa leave together or enter a room together. The defense argued that any sexual encounter must have been consensual, that Vanessa had simply forgotten in her drunken state. They painted her as a woman looking to cover up an affair. The case dragged on for months. Vanessa's pregnancy progressed. She grew rounder, the baby active inside her. She felt him kick during the preliminary hearing. She felt him hiccup during the motion to dismiss. Derek stayed by her side through all of it, his hand on her belly, talking to his son even as the defense argued that the child was proof of Vanessa's infidelity rather than her victimization. I watched my brother transform during those months. The easygoing, quick-to-laugh man I'd known my whole life became harder, more serious. He attended every hearing, staring at Craig Donovan with an intensity that made me afraid of what he might do. But he never lost control. He channeled all that rage into supporting Vanessa, into preparing for the baby, into demanding justice through the legal system rather than his fists. The trial began when Vanessa was 36 weeks pregnant. She testified heavily pregnant, her hands resting on her belly as she described the night she couldn't remember. The defense tore into her. How could she claim rape when she had no memory of it? How could she be certain she hadn't wanted it, hadn't sought it out? Why had she continued working with Craig for months after the trip if something so terrible had happened? Vanessa answered each question with a steady voice, explaining trauma responses, explaining unconscious consent, explaining how the mind protects itself from unbearable truths. She was incredible, heartbreaking and strong and utterly unshakable. The prosecution presented the DNA evidence, the timeline, the genetic connection between Craig and William Turner. They brought in an expert who explained how Craig could have researched his biological family, discovered the connection to Derek, and targeted Vanessa specifically because of that connection. They argued premeditation, that this was revenge or entitlement or sickness passed down through generations. My mother testified about what William had done to her 40 years ago. She was crying as she described it, but she got through every word. She looked Craig in the eye and told him he was just like his father, that the capacity for evil had been inherited along with the genetic markers. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. We waited in the hallway outside the courtroom, Vanessa timing her contractions. She'd started labor that morning, but refused to go to the hospital until the verdict was read. "I need to be here," she insisted. "I need to know." At 4:30 in the afternoon, the jury came back. Guilty on all counts. Vanessa sobbed. Derek held her. My mother collapsed into my father's arms. Noah squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. Craig Donovan showed no emotion as the verdicts were read. Even as the judge remanded him to custody pending sentencing, even as the bailiffs approached to take him away, his face remained blank. But as he was led past our row, he looked directly at Vanessa, and he smiled. It was William's smile. I'd seen it in old photographs. That same cold curve of the lips that didn't reach the eyes. Derek lunged. It took 3 men to hold him back as Craig was rushed out of the courtroom. We drove to the hospital straight from the courthouse. Vanessa's contractions were 4 minutes apart. She was admitted immediately, Derek still in his court clothes, both of them exhausted and traumatized and somehow also hopeful. I stayed in the waiting room with Noah and Riley, who'd been picked up from school for the occasion. Mom and Dad came an hour later, both looking shell-shocked but lighter somehow. The baby was born at 8:17 that night, 7 pounds, 3 ounces, healthy and perfect and completely unaware of the darkness that had preceded his arrival. Derek sent a photo, a tiny red face, eyes squeezed shut, a shock of dark hair. They named him Oliver, not after anyone, just a name they both loved, a fresh start. Craig Donovan was sentenced to 23 years in prison 6 weeks later. He'll be eligible for parole in 16. By then, Oliver will be a teenager, old enough to understand what happened, old enough to know that his biological father is a monster, but his real father is the man who chose to love him before he was even born. Vanessa made a decision I respected, even though I didn't fully understand it. She kept the baby, kept Oliver. She said he was innocent in all of this, that he deserved a chance at life and love despite the circumstances of his conception. Derek agreed without hesitation. Oliver is 2 now, and he looks nothing like Craig. He has Vanessa's smile, Derek's laugh, and a personality entirely his own. When I see them together, the 3 of them, I see a family built on choice rather than biology. I see love stronger than DNA. My mother started volunteering with a sexual assault advocacy group. She speaks at workshops about delayed disclosure, about the long-term effects of trauma, about how silence protects predators. My father goes with her, standing in the back of rooms, a quiet presence supporting her as she shares her story over and over, helping other women find their voices. We have dinner together every month, but we don't eat in the dining room anymore. That space holds too many ghosts. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.